welcome to another edition of Green is Good, and we're so honored to have with us today Ron Loch. He's the Managing Director of Sustainability Consulting at GNS Business Communications. Welcome to Green is Good, Ron.
Thanks, John. Glad to be here.
Happy to have you. And, before we get talking about all the great work you're doing at GNS Business Communications with your colleagues, can you share the Ron Loch story, please?
Yeah, certainly. I guess I've always been rooted in an interest, particularly in the environment. I started out in fisheries and wildlife biology about 30 years ago, and soon came to discover, though, that I'm a rather math-challenged person and was always good at communication, so I pivoted and went into journalism. And about 6 years ago, as I was getting along in my career, I've been with this agency for 28 years, wanted to look at maybe making a change, get more inspired after such a long period of time, and realized, as I looked around, sustainability had become a great business challenge that companies were dealing with, our clients were dealing with, and so I went back to school and got a master's degree in managing the sustainable enterprise and started the consulting practice within GNS Business Communications, and been focused on that ever since, helping companies figure out their sustainability strategy and communicating that to their stakeholders.
And was that, were you happy that, as you said, pivoted? Has that pivot turned out to be the right pivot for you?
It absolutely has. I have a lot of passion for this, and it is a critical issue that all companies are dealing with, and so we just keep seeing the market increase for a company like ours to help them identify issues and communicate what they're doing around the relationship with society and the environment.
That's great. And for our listeners to learn more about everything that Ron's doing at GNS Business Communications, you could go to www.gscommunications.com. It's really easy, www.gscommunications.com. You just have published a sense and sustainability study. Can you share a little bit about what that means and what's in that study?
Sure. Yeah, we started this 6 years ago when I began the practice, just to gauge where general consumers in the U.S. are in relation to sustainability and corporations. And so this year, in our sixth study, we asked some questions around understanding not only of sustainability but also of science, and we found that nearly 40% of Americans don't feel real comfortable with their practical understanding of science. And also what we're finding is many Americans don't have a sufficient grasp of how companies can practice sustainability. And when we talk about sustainability, we're asking them questions around the well-being of the planet, people, and communities. So it's both environmental and social issues.
And so how do you think, why is this? Why are Americans so uninformed when it comes to sustainability, and how can we improve that?
Yeah, I think one reason is that if you look at most companies, and certainly there's certain companies that sustainability is part of their marketing efforts, but largely the information that consumers are exposed to have nothing to do with that relationship that the company has with the environment or society. And they really would have to dig very deep into investor relations or on their corporate website to find that information. So I think the lack of accessibility is one of the critical issues we're seeing influencing this. And then there's also just, I think, an unhealthy skepticism still. People have been fed this idea that, you can't be a good business and also really care about environmental and social issues. And I think that comes into play as well.
Interesting. So, since, as you say, there's a skepticism towards business and about being green because there's been so much greenwashing, frankly, as you and I well know. How do you help businesses raise their visibility and get the credit and build the reputation for being green when they're doing the right thing?
Yeah, one of the keys is really focusing on those issues where they can have the greatest impact. And that takes an analysis of what kinds of products or services they offer and what that entails, so that the issues that they talk about are ones where they truly can have an impact on the environment or on the local community. Some of the greenwashing comes from aspirations that have nothing to do with the business, and if you can't impact it through your business, you're not going to have results. So that's first, is just making sure that you're addressing relevant issues. And then from there, it is really being transparent in setting goals and not being afraid to talk about not achieving those goals, but really, through storytelling, addressing the progress that you're making and also the impact that it's having. Sometimes we're hiding behind legalese and data-driven jargon, and what's lost is the real positive impact even the smallest activities can have on improving the environment or improving the lives of people. So we really push, getting a better level of storytelling out in front of consumers.
Ron, what kind of companies come to GNS Business Communications for your services? Is it huge multinationals? Is it smaller, locally oriented businesses? How big or small are the companies? And then what are they looking at in terms of what's pushing them now to want to market or message more sustainability or their green behavior?
For the most part, it is large companies, Fortune 500, some Fortune 1000 companies that we work with. And where they're finding value and interest largely is they're public companies, and there is just rising investor interest in sustainability. So that's one. Another is just what social media has done, which means nothing's really opaque any longer with companies. Everything is pretty transparent. And so this recognition that, your activities, people will know where you have a relationship with the community, within your supply chain, the environmental conditions within the supply chain. And then lastly is just experience in approaching these issues and realizing the value that's inherent in having a strong sustainability strategy.
Right.
It's not just about mitigating risks, and a lot of companies did get to sustainability with the idea, how do we mitigate our risks, particularly environmental risks. But now what they're seeing is you can also reduce costs, but more importantly, you can create tremendous value and through innovation and differentiation if you have a very robust sustainability program.
Are people if it's Fortune 500 companies that are walking through your doors, is it companies that already have sustainability programs, or is it really driven by a CEO who says, hey, listen, we're going to hire our first or promote our first chief sustainability officer. We're finally going to create that position. And I want you to work with Ron to now create a whole suite of messaging and opportunities at the company so we could get some wins and then we can message those wins. Is it across the board already people who have programs and then some others that you have to create? Or what kind of groups of Fortune 500 companies are coming to you, and how much do you have to do for them?
It's both. And in some cases, it's companies that have been focused on sustainability as long as 15 years. And what they're coming to us for there is, how can we tell this story better? How can we communicate with our stakeholders more effectively? In other cases, particularly in this year, it's often companies that are a little further up the supply chain, maybe in industries where they have not had to communicate a lot because they don't have their business to business. They don't have a lot of customers, and now they're realizing that they're getting questions from their investors, or they may be getting questions from their downstream customer. Who's got a very robust reporting program, and they need kind of the soup to nuts. What issues should we be focused on? What kind of strategies should we have? And how do we effectively tell this story? So it really does vary. There's companies at every stage of the sustainability journey right now. But one trend I will say that I'm seeing is just the questions from investors and customers is starting to drive greater awareness about the business importance of sustainability.
That's great. And for our listeners who just joined us, we've got Ron Loch on with us. He's the Managing Director of Sustainability Consulting at GNS Business Communications. To learn more about what Ron is doing and his colleagues are doing at GNS Business Communications, you could go to www.gscommunications.com. So your sense and sustainability study has been published, and it's evolving in terms of the information that you gather. Talk a little bit about. We love to offer solutions on Green is Good, Ron, and we have lots of business owners that listen to the show. What are some ways businesses can make their efforts to go green more appealing to their clients or potential clients?
Yeah, well, with our study found a couple of things, and one is to really humanize or soften the language. We found we took terms to see what would resonate the most with consumers. And when you look at the terms that are resonating the most, human rights and wildlife protection fare much better than deforestation, carbon footprint, climate change. And so it does make sense when you sit back and think about it from a communication standpoint. Babies and animals still sell in advertising, right? And I think this is what this is telling us is to while we have to focus on the broader issues, for example, deforestation, because deforestation as an issue has tremendous implications both for human rights as well as wildlife protection. But when we get down to the point of telling the story of what we're focused on and the impact that's having, not losing that element, that kind of soft emotional element, that speaking about how, fellow community members are benefiting or how we're benefiting animals that live within a forest. That's a much more compelling way to reach these people. Another would be not to ignore the news media. Yeah. The news media, by and large, and this has been tracking year to year, is still very important for a source that people go to understand what businesses are doing around sustainability. Its news media gets more than 50%. After that, it's word of mouth, which is 40%. So the news media is very, very important. We would think social media, but compared to news media, social media is 32% of the consumers say that's where they're going for that information. So it's critically important. And the CSR reports, only 15% say they're going there for this information. And so those are very important. The CSR reports, they're important for investors, they're important for industry. But, to fully get your story out there, they do need to look at multimedia approaches.
Right. So you can't just go all in. And what you're saying is you just can't go all in on social and forget everything else just because your kids are now all over Facebook and you say that's the way to go. You've got to give a diverse approach to getting the message out.
Absolutely. And I think, you could probably make the argument that the social media, oftentimes kind of the wellspring of what's being shared, would start in your traditional news media.
Now, you deal with lots of brands, big and small, Ron, obviously. Talk a little bit now. Let's continue what you were just saying about getting the message out. Talk about generational differences. I'm 52. My son's 22. How do you reach 52-year-olds and 22-year-olds?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, I do think first and foremost, the stories will still resonate. You're both going to be associating with those stories that make it easy for you to understand how a program is benefiting, whether it's people or the environment. That mix, again, you may be more inclined to the news media, where your son may be more social, but collectively picking both of you up, you'll get that word of mouth, which is second most important. What's interesting, though, is our study would show that your interest in this topic is going to vary widely, where your son's generation is really looking for this information, whereas our generation isn't as much. In fact, we found that about a quarter of consumers are not interested in learning how companies are going green, and that was largely driven by our generation.
So you're saying a quarter of consumers, but what's the number when it comes to the millennials? Then is that number much bigger if you broke them down just on generational issues?
Right. No, only 18% of millennials would say that they're not interested.
Wow.
Versus the older Gen Xers, younger baby boomers, which would be defined as 45 to 54, that was 29%. So about a third of our generation is saying they don't really care to know. And by and large, millennials at 18% was the ones who care the most.
Yeah. What's the biggest misperception about green technologies and sustainability right now?
That they're costly or don't perform as well as so-called traditional approaches. I kind of guess that skepticism I brought up earlier. We've been, led to believe that these approaches always cost more money or deliver, a product or service that, isn't up to par. And that's just not the case. What we see is companies seeing tremendous innovation and growth by addressing the challenges that we have with the environment and society.
That's so interesting. So this whole fallacy of I don't want to go green or I don't want to take my company green because it costs more money is really just a bunch of hooey, really, Ron. You're saying, really, if companies do it right and they work with folks like you and other great leaders, they can make it great for the bottom line and make it cultural at their company.
Absolutely. And the thing is, it goes beyond the hard costs and returns. Every study will show that employee retention and recruitment are improved by pursuing, a sustainability program. And there's a cost associated with that, and obviously there's value associated with that. The innovation and product line growth that can come from addressing these challenges is huge. So it's not just cost reduction by improving your energy footprint. There are so many different ways that businesses are gathering value by addressing the challenges that we face, both on the environmental side and societal side.
And we're down to the last minute. What's the biggest catalyst for companies to become greener? What did you learn in your Sense and Sustainability study and in all your work? Biggest catalyst for companies to become greener?
It is just what I was saying. It's really the business value that can be derived through reduced costs, growth and value, and mitigating risks. I
love it. That's great. That's a lot. That's a lot of this.
It is. It's better business, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And for our listeners to read your Sense and Sustainability study, they can contact you. Is that how they get it?
Yeah, or they can go on the website that you've given, gscommunications.com, and there's a button on there they can go access the study.
Wow, that's awesome. So for our listeners out there, again, this has been Ron Loch, the Managing Director of Sustainability Consulting at GNS Business Communications. And to download Sense and Sustainability study that he did, go to gscommunications.com. Thank you, Ron, for sharing the GNS communication story with our listeners today. You are making the world a better place and are truly living proof that green is good.